and it is a community project financed totally by the community. It is fitting also that it is on land that was owned by the Colbert family at one stage, and they were donated to build a hall in honour of Con Colbert, the Con Colbert Memorial Hall, which is here on my left-hand side. This magnificent one in the background is a recent structure, also built by the people of Athea, which we can be very, very proud of. But back in 1974, this one was opened over here. And we are very privileged today to have some members of the original committee with us. We have two of them sitting down here, Timmy Woulfe and John O'Connell. And I'm going to call him one of them now, a man who has distinguished himself on the football field and in the classroom. And also in his promotion of cultural Irish art, something that he has done in his life and continues to do to this day. Would you welcome please to give the oration Mr. Timmy Woulfe.
I was approached by Donald here about 2 weeks ago and telling me about what was happening here today, and would I say a few words? And in view of my seniority and the privileges that go with it, I said no. And he said maybe, you know, it would be nice just to remember the committee that you served on. I said no, and I went away and I left it at that. And then I began to, well, reminisce to myself about the people he was referring to, and it didn't take me long to more or less get my conscience right, because they were the best committee that ever came out of Athea. They were lucky in the sense that the occasion that they were promoting, namely a memorial to Con Colbert, was an odds-on favourite as a winner all the way through, because the minute you mentioned the name Colbert in Athea, it evoked a kind of an esteem that you wouldn't normally associate with an ordinary person. That there was a kind of respect for Con Colbert and for what he did. And even in the fellow years, in my younger years, you know, Athea was always regarded as a kind of a backward place because it was off the main road, you know, the road through Abbeyfield and then through Glynn and so on. But we always had this kind of a riposte when somebody tried to put us down. Tell me, have you anyone in your place that was executed in 1916? And the answer was, you know what the answer was. And did you have, by any chance, an Olympic Games champion or a world record holder, triple jumper? No. So we changed the subject pretty rapidly. So, as I say, I think there are only 4 or 5 of the original committee still alive. I'm happy to be one of them. John here is the other. John has John has kept, or did keep, this hall here alive. You know, when the hoo-ha had died down, the hall had to be kept running. John kept it running, and Nora Wren, another stalwart, she was county councillor. Penny over there, just beyond the school, another stalwart, and John Moran. They were mainly the ones, you know. But just to get back to the beginning, and it says, not since the struggle for freedom has Athea witnessed such enthusiasm and unity as is evident in its plans to commemorate the men of 1916, and in particular Con Colbert. This parish knows of its 50 years of neglect in perpetuating his memory and hopes to make the belated amends in this commemorative year. During October and November of last year, tentative suggestions were mooted among various local organisations. The first step in the right direction came with the formation of a committee embracing all parish organisations. This inaugural meeting was easily the most representative ever held in the place. One of the striking features of it was the number of women who were appointed on the committee and who have been a valuable asset. These aren't my words at all now, although I concur with them greatly. Great care was taken that it should have no political or social bias. As well as that, all surviving old IRA and Castlemahon members were elected honorary members as a token of appreciation of the parts they played in their time. After a lengthy discussion, it was decided that a community centre was the most fitting memorial that could be erected. As against the monuments, etc., the meeting held that a community centre would be a living memorial which would be a constant reminder of a noble parishioner. It would be a major task, running into several thousands of pounds. This target would be reached only by a supreme effort. Half-hearted, half-finished way would desecrate rather than honour the memory of Con Colbert. Hard upon this decision came the knowledge that little was known of him by the present generation. Hence, immediate efforts were made to arrange a lecture on his life. Mr. Oliver Snoddy, MA History Section, National Museum, spoke to a packed hall on December the 12th on the subject. He was followed by Mr. Eamon Dorr, a Glyn man now domiciled in Limerick, a fellow rebel and bosom friend of Con's, who gave a remarkable eyewitness account of the fighting in Dublin during Easter week. Also included among the panel of speakers were Captain Kevin Danaher, distinguished son of a distinguished father of this parish, and you can say that again, Dr. Cusson of Newcastle West, who made the arrangements for the lecture, and I think Oliver Snoddy was his son-in-law, and Oliver Snoddy has a son who is now a member of the All Ireland, Angus O'Snoddy, and I think his mother was Cleona Cusson, who was a sculptor in her own right. Okay. So he made the arrangements for the lecture and has given invaluable help at all times, and Mr. Brian McMahon of Listowel was there also. This was the spur to action the committee required. One could not fail to be inspired by the supreme dedication, the utter implacability, and the spirit of self-sacrifice of Colbert the Rebel. Is it reasonable to suggest that these sterling qualities provide the motive power in the committee's resolve? The problem of selecting a site followed, not merely to select so much as to reject. In other words, not every site might be suitable. Of the many available, it was decided to accept one near the bridge. This was being donated in memory of the late Mrs. William Colbert. Ellen Ann Colbert was the proprietress of this place here, and it was an astonishing offer to give us this place. I would imagine that if it were for sale now, it would cost an arm and a leg, maybe 200,000 or what. It doesn't matter at this stage, does it? Now, numerous fundraising projects have been suggested, and if I may say, we went through the usual list. Among the most astonishing was that the committee decided that we would collect at every church gate in the Diocese of Limerick. We would collect at every church gate. Monumental work, because a group of scouts would set off on the Saturday to a parish in the far southeast of Limerick, and they would try and contact every organisation in the parish, be it GAA, be it political party, be it rugby or soccer or Macra na Ferma, ICA, it did not matter. And the extraordinary thing was that where you think it might be an insurmountable kind of a thing, there was no problem. The support promised was unqualified. We had the greatest collections in almost every parish that they had ever had at a church gate collection, because, well, each political party had its own supporters, the GAA, the ICA, all the others. We had a building that was at the time thought to be expensive. It was Tom Sheehan, architect. I think he had a papal honour at the beginning of his name, as a Chevalier or something like that, and he designed this place for free. In years later, when we couldn't pay for it, at our request, he reduced it by 1/3. We were in real trouble for ages. We were at a complete logjam, and a decent parish priest, he was one of the great gentlemen of my time, Canon Cusson, happened to be in a bank. Oh, by the way, our bank wouldn't touch us, but he was in a bank in Abbeyfield, and he mentioned our dilemma, and the bank manager said, "Send him in to me." We couldn't wait to get there. We got the money from him, and that's how the hall came to be built. No, I just one other little bit. See now that I'm a mix and gathering of bits of paper and that sort of thing, and these are papers going back to 1965 and 66, but the original committee, which obviously didn't remain that because we augmented it by bringing in 1 or 2 people who weren't there. But anyway, the Enterprise Hall was packed on Sunday night when Mr. Oliver Snoddy delivered a lecture and so on. Our picture shows the members of the committee and the speakers last Sunday night. Front row is Mrs. K. Colbert. She was Patrick Colbert's wife. They owned the hall over there, and they were the great benefactors of everybody in the parish, because you wanted to have a little meeting. Sure, Kit will let us in, Patrick will let us in, and there was never a question of paying for it until I think I was partly responsible for it anyway, because I remember the GAA team used to train inside there. And I remember one night running around the floor, and the next thing somebody put his big foot down the weakness and down through the floorboard. So we decided at that stage that, charity begins at home, and we decided to pay a small little rent for it. But anyway, Mrs. K. Colbert, Mrs. Nora Wren, Mr. James Colbert, Bray, brother of Con Colbert, myself, Miss Agnes Fitzgibbon, Mrs. Ellen McGrath, Senator Mrs. Kitty Hearn of Ballybunion, and then in the second row you had Willie Welsh, and I need to mention him especially because he was an engineer. He still is an engineer living in this stall, a human dynamo who sort of drove the ship along relentlessly. So after Willie Welsh was Danaher of Ballybunion, John Joe O'Connor, who was the reliable, Miss Bridie Shine, John O'Connell, who was sitting there beside me, Miss T. Liston, that's Teresa Milan now, Mr. Tommy Reedy, with his brother Henry, actually built the hall, Mr. Jimmy Hearn, Willie Hurley, Captain Kevin Danaher, who was obviously one of the great benefactors. In the third row then there was Mick Scanlon, Mickey and Ted as we used to call him, Mick Milan, Mickey and Dean, John Joe Barrett, Dan Liston, Pairc O'Connor. The fourth row then were some notables indeed. Dan Cullinan of Abbeyfield, Mr. Oliver Snoddy, Mr. E. Dorr of Limerick and Glynn, Mr. Brian McMahon, and Dr. Orcusson. Just a couple of other things when it comes to talking about how did we finance the hall. John Connell and Patty Enright bought a marquee. We had a second carnival around the corner there. It used to come on in October, November, and so on. But then John was a great man for fishing out information. His wife, Nora's sister-in-law from Dublin, Kathleen Matthews, was talking about this money-making thing. And we had heard nothing about it, but John got in touch with her anyway, and she was talking about it would be the credit union. So we said, we might make a few bob out of that. So 3 people came down one Sunday night over there into the hall, and there was in attendance about 15 people, every one of them dressed up in an overcoat because it was a cold winter's night and so on. There was no heating in the place that time. And we allowed ourselves to be persuaded to set up a study group. And in the midst of all our travails with regard to putting up our memorial, we were foolish enough to go get involved in the credit union, and that's how that started in 1968. And for those of you who know about the credit union in Athea, well, it's not likely to fold now, but Con Colbert in his own, in an indirect kind of a way, contributed to the start of the credit union in Athea. So I'm going to finish up very shortly now, but here we go. And this was on the 14th of January 1974, 8 years after the campaign to build the hall started. We are now ready to go. The hall was built, so here we go. And President Childers, by the way, it wasn't customary for the President of Ireland to go out opening halls here and there. The newspaper said it was his first official visit to Limerick, but I think it was his first visit outside of Dublin. Nowadays, you can find, thanks be to God, our president anywhere. I saw him at the ploughing championship the other day, so I think I don't know, had he any Wellingtons on him or not, but anyway. President Childers paid his first official visit to County Limerick on Sunday, and the reception he received in Athea when he arrived to officially open the Con Colbert Memorial Hall was one of the most enthusiastic since his election to office. Thousands turned up to greet the President and Mrs. Childers. The ceremonies were indeed a fitting finale to the 8 years of hard work put in by the Con Colbert Memorial Committee, who in that time have raised almost 20,000. The site for the building was donated by Miss Ellen Ann Colbert, a cousin of Con Colbert. The idea, first mooted by somebody, he was teaching at the National School, and Limerick County Council representative Mrs. Nora Wren, has resulted in the patriot who spent most of his youth in the area being honoured, and at the same time the village being provided with one of the most up-to-date community centres in the county, I would say in Ireland at the time, because lots of people were coming around to the idea of having a community centre, and what they mostly did was they refurbished old buildings, old schoolhouses, you know, and it was grand. And some of them are beautiful structures to this day, but I think we were the first really to start from the foundation up. And were it not for Ellen and Colbert, it would be very difficult. You know, I don't know what would happen anyway. So, anyway. The ceremonies on Sunday commenced at the Devon Inn at Templeglanton, where the President and Mrs. Childers were entertained to lunch by the committee. Shortly after 3 p.m, the presidential limousine set out at the head of a cavalcade to Athea. A large number of people greeted the Childers as they passed through Abbey Field, and between there and Athea, several bonfires blazed along the roadside. On arrival at Athea, the President and his wife were greeted by the boys and girls of the Kilcolman School Band. Now this is interesting. Two of the young musicians, Con Colbert and Brendan Dorr, are grandnephews of Con Colbert. So I'm sure somebody would be aware of who they are. The presidential car slowly made its way through the large crowd before getting up to the hall. There Mrs. Childers was presented with a bouquet by 11-year-old Marie O'Connell. Is she here? Okay. After the presidential salute was sounded by the army band, Mr. Childers inspected a guard of honour drawn up by a unit of the Southern Command. He then met members of the West Limerick Brigade, old array. The oldest among them was Mr. Michael Woulfe, no relation. The President was introduced to the members of the unit by Mr. Larry Hartnett Abbeyfield, who was engineer with the brigade. He was known locally as Larry Ellen, a baker. Now the rest, you know, is kind of formal and so on. Their father was one of the great gentlemen, the great scholars who taught in Clash School, taught in Athea, did more than that at a time when there was no such thing as even first level education or second education. He had a night school over in Clash School, and he prepared people for just about every profession you could think of. Some of them excise officers, civil servants, teachers, priests, doctors, and so on. But they were also very friendly with Con Colbert, and Con Colbert would invariably visit them. He loved coming to Athea, and he would visit the Danahers. But when he came to Athea, he was assigned as a kind of a watchdog, one of the local RIC. There was one man in particular, it was a nickname, of course. He was known as Patsy Casey, and he followed him openly everywhere he went. Now, he used to be hiding, you know, up near Costello's now, and Con would have been well aware of it. And one day, anyway, Con decided he was going to have a little target practice. He had a rifle, and he went out and he put a little target up on the bush behind which the poor Patsy Casey or constable, whatever he was hiding, and he prepared to start taking shots, but poor old Patsy fled anyway. He wasn't seen for the rest of the evening. There was another time he was going up to Danaher's one night, and it was pouring rain, and poor old Patsy had to follow him, and Con went into Danaher's and spoke and so on, and the subject of poor old Patsy came up, and Con said, "Bring him in." So the housekeeper went out and brought him in, and into the kitchen naturally, and he said, "We'll tell you now when he's going, and we'll make you a cup of tea." and that was it. I heard another little anecdote from Ned Liston, that would be Teresa's father, who lived up the street. He spent his time learning his trade as a shop in Dublin, and Croke Park was a great centre that time for lads from the country, the same nowadays as Gaelic Park in New York and various other centres where the Irish converge, we'll say, at weekends. And Ned used to go to Croke Park literally every Sunday when anything was on. But Con was a regular there. Apparently, he used to go around with a saucepan tied on to the end of the handle of a bush or something like that, and he was collecting money for the volunteers or whatever organisation he was representing. And it just goes to show you the energy of the man and the enthusiasm of the man, and so forth. There might be a few more things, but I've forgotten. I do know that Con was recruiting members of the IRB, and I do know the names of two people from Athea. The IRB, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know it, was a secret organisation, outbound and that sort of thing. Very influential in the troubles of the time and so on, but names not disclosed to anybody, but I do know at least two. So he brought the fight down to his own place as well as whatever he did elsewhere. So I'm finishing off now because